In regards to Taimen flies in particular, this particular pike fly on this now obsolete 5-inch long shank hook doesn't do a good job of hooking the fish. They also get a lot of leverage on the fly because of the extra long shank. So my proposal to circumvent that problem and to make things a little bit more user-friendly, we're dealing with a salmonid, and as we know, all salmonids tend to be nippers. They nip at the back of the fly often. So we're going to do this in a series of shanks. This is a 1/0 hook. This is a 4/0 hook. We're going to attach these hooks with solid stainless steel wire shanks. The reason why we're using the solid stainless instead of nylon coated is because we're dealing with fish that may reach 100 pounds or more. And with these fish, we found that they tend to separate the wire from the flies rather quickly if we just tie it down, and even if we super glue it down to the hook shank. So by passing the wire through the hook eye, we have a solid direct connection that still allows our fly to have the great wiggling movement, articulated motion that we're looking for. So we're going to build this fly in a series of 4 steps and still come up with the same length that we're trying to achieve and using the same material. Let's get into how we're going to form that material. So here we have a swatch of Hairline's Extra Select Craft Fur. This is the best craft fur to use because of its density and the fact that it has 3 different lengths of hair on it, culminating in one that's nearly 4 inches long. So now let's take a look at the back side of this, and this is where the magic really happens. Try to get this close to the lens. If you notice, there's a stitch line that goes across this way. And the idea here is that we're going to cut across this stitching, like so. Now you want to keep your width somewhere around 3/8 of an inch wide. If you get it too narrow, you won't capture enough hair and the hair will pull out. If you get it too wide, it'll make it a little bit more difficult to handle and it'll make it too bulky. So generally what I do is I just kind of spread the hair off of the backing a little bit, and this doesn't have to be too scientific. You don't need to brush it out or anything. I just want to make a little space here. Then I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm not going to hold them open real wide. I'm going to keep them narrow so I don't cut too much hair off the backing. And starting right down here at the bottom, I'm just going to cut in a relatively straight line all the way up. I will inadvertently cut some of these fibers, and we're not going to get too concerned about that. That's not a real big issue, and they'll just pull out as we go into the next step here. So now we've got this strip, and as you can see, all the stitching marks are going perpendicular to our cut, and to make it a little waterproof. And that's this, the tear mender. It's a latex base adhesive that's just about instant. It works really well on fabric and on leather for double bunnies and things like that. So I'm just going to give this a bit of a shake here. I'll twist open the top, and I'm just going to lay a bead of this all the way down this strip. And it doesn't have to be a real heavy bead. It kind of takes care of itself. So once I get to that point, I'm going to grab both ends of this and squeeze them together over the top of themselves, like so. Now, as I pull, you can see the material wrapping itself into a circle and literally forming its own chenille. So all I have to do is wait for this to dry. It usually takes about maybe 3 to 5 minutes for it to dry. So generally what I do is I put some weight on one end and I just hang it up and give it a few minutes to dry. Okay, our cement is dried. As you can see, this is just a really big piece of chenille that we created. If you look closely, you can see the glue seam, but it's not real visible. And even though it didn't make the interior core of this completely waterproof, at this width and this diameter, it wraps itself into a circle all by itself. We don't have to do anything special to do that. We now have a product that we can build our fly body with. So let's proceed with our first end of our shank. And the reason for putting this little wrap down here is just to give me some place to hold it securely in my fly tying vise. I've bent this wire by hand using a simple jeweler's pliers. It bends readily. It's easy to work with. You take a piece of the wire, and I usually start about an inch back, and depending on how large a diameter of ring I want to put in it, depends on where I start on the pliers. I usually start about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch up. I'll bend the wire back first, just about 90 degrees, not quite, maybe 70 degrees or so. Then I'll wrap that all the way around the jaw. So I'm at this point. I'll continue wrapping till I come all the way back around, and I'll grab that right down about even with the kink that I put in the first time and just bend the wire back. That will give me a nice small diameter ring that I'm looking for. So now that I've got my ring made, and this is 125-pound test wire, roughly 57 kilograms. All I do is I put a little loop on the end of it, just enough to hold it in my vise. So I'm just going to trim the wire, grab the wire, and just rotate this around my pliers to get to my desired length. And it can be trimmed off afterwards if you want to trim it off. Usually I leave it on because it helps to keel the fly up in the back and keep it swimming straight. And I'll make sure that I have this perpendicular so that when I place it on my wire that I've already made to hold the hook on, this goes through the hook eye, and this small diameter wire still doesn't interfere with the hook eye. These two will fit together like so, and there's my articulation. And I can keep building that as many times as I want to, going forward to whatever length I want to create. So that's where we'll start. We'll start with our wire that's set up for the tail of the fly, and we'll just keep working our way forward until we get all the way to the front end. Let's have some fun. So I've got the wire in my vise, and I'm going to start right here and pull that eye together. I'm using some 210 denier thread a little bit, make it a little easier for me to tie the material on. I'm going to start, or my medium olive here, and I'm going to tie this on in what I call upside down and backwards, just like this. So I'll pull the hair to the rear, and I'll tie this in right back here. And again, I'll use my thread to stiffen it up a little bit. I'll stroke the material back as I wind it forward. And I'll tease this out with my bodkin so that the hair doesn't get tangled up too much as I wrap forward. And we'll just keep wrapping forward on this as we go. This will form a nice, good base for the tail of our perch. Now once I get up to about this halfway point, I'm going to pull the hair away and tie that off. Trim my material. And I'll wrap back over the top of that hair a little bit. Then I'll take my brush and I can brush that out. And then I'll add a little bit of flash. Olive colored head-run accent flash. Maybe about 6 or 8 strands. I want to make this about the same length as my material. I'll put it right on this side of the hook. I'll take another 6 or 8 strands and I'll do the same thing on the opposite side. Gauge that out, approximately the same length. Tie that right in on the side, then I'll take my excess and I'm going to pull it right up over the top, just like so. Now we'll take some of the golden yellow. We'll tie that in, take the thread up to the shank, tease our material out, and we'll take a couple of wraps of this. Doing the same technique, very simple, just wrap it like it's a big chenille. When I get up to the eye, tease my material out, and we'll tie off. Whip finish right here. Trim that. I'll touch that eye up a little bit with my hot tip. There we go. And we'll super glue it. I like using a good quality super glue so that it penetrates the thread wraps really well and keeps the fly held together for a long period of time. So there's our butt section. Now all we're going to do is add to that our next shank, and that will be our hook. So we'll place the hook in here so that we have a stinger hook towards the rear of the fly. So I remove this, and you can see where I've got my little piece of wire dangling down here. It can be removed if you want to, but it doesn't interfere with the fly, and I think that it helps it to swim a little better. Keeps it keeled up and adds just a little weight down there on the bottom. So we'll place our 1/0 hook in the vise. We've got our wire lined up here, and I'll start my thread right by the eye. Now it's real important to pull back on that wire so that you don't leave it dangling up in the middle of the hook eye. If I loosen this up a little bit, you can see how that could get covered up. So make sure that you pull that wire back real tight when you start to tighten up that thread and to wrap that down. Now I'll take my first shank and I'll place that on, making sure that's down on the bottom. So that's basically the tail of our entire pattern. Now in order to stiffen this up a little bit, I'll usually take my thread and wind over that bare part of the shank. I could have made it shorter, but I wanted that good movement, and this will keep it from fouling. It won't allow it to get inside here and foul. If I keep that ring just about at the back end of the shank, now we'll super glue that down also, even though I don't think there's any way that any fish is going to pull that apart. We're still dealing with some monstrously large fish here, so there's no sense in taking a chance with them. Now I'll take a few more wraps of my golden olive. You'll have a little difficulty working around that hook point on your first one or two wraps. Don't worry, it's not that difficult. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. I get about halfway up that hook shank. I'm going to trim that. Tie it down well, and we can come in and fluff it up with our brush. I'm going to take just a wrap or two of some fluorescent orange to simulate the perch's fins. You see how I tease the material out to the back. There's one, we'll do two wraps. Tie that off, trim, brush it out, and we just keep proceeding with our colors as we move up in our subsequent shanks. I got enough room on there, I can squeeze on a wrap of yellow. We'll grab the golden yellow. Now we're ready to add our next shank. We've already prepared our next shank. We know what's going on there. Make sure that it moves freely. I'll place that firmly in the vise and we'll wrap it in solidly. Now, as I said on the onset, we're dealing with a salmonid, so we don't want to get our hook points too close together. If we get our hook points too close together, it'll render that rear hook ineffective. So I like to have about 2 to 2.5 inches between my hook points. So that's what I'm planning for here with this longer shank in the middle. At this point, we just continue to wrap in our material. Now I want to start putting some barring into my perch, so I'm going to go to a much darker olive. You could use black, but I think the black is just a little too strong. I prefer the dark olive. And the same technique, we're just going to keep repeating this as we build ourselves all the way up to fly. I'm going to take 2 wraps of this. Make sure you pull it nice and tight. Because this crushes down so well, because it's a synthetic fiber, it's pretty easy to work with and to wrap back over so that you're not applying too much material at a time. And by treating this material like a giant chenille, you really don't have to worry about the material pulling out or the fly coming apart prematurely. And this makes a fine pike fly also. So now we'll go with some more of our golden yellow. And remember to keep teasing it out so that it doesn't bind up on you and get all wrapped up underneath. Starting to look a lot like a perch now. About time for some more flash. I'm going to use a little brighter color this time. I'm going to use a root beer color. And this I'm going to shorten up a little bit, so I'm going to use about 8 or 10 strands of flash. And I'll make this equal. I'll make this equal so it goes down both sides of the shank so that it'll be most visible to the fish. Pull it over the top, right down the side. There we have our flash on both sides of the shank. Back to our dark olive. I'm going to use some of my golden olive again. We'll finish out the front of this shank with our golden olive. At some point, I sometimes feel like my fly might be getting a little long and thin. And in order to build a little bulk on the fly, without really adding much more weight to it, or more material, too much more material, what I'll do is I'll take a strip of this, maybe an inch or so of it, and I'll trim it off the backing. So I've got just the hair, and I'll pull out the first short layer of the underfur. Gather that up in my fingers, trim the butt ends so they're even, and I'll put that right on top of the hook shank and pull that down. And as you can see, that effectively builds a real nice little crown on top of my fly, and I've created a lot more profile up there without really adding a whole lot more material. Add our super glue and move on to the hook shank, to the main hook shank, and we'll just keep repeating our steps until we've created the perch profile in that 8 or 10 inch perch that we're looking to create. So far, we could almost fish this fly just the way it is. By the time we get done building it out, we'll have something spectacular. All right, we've got 6 or 7 inches here of shanked fly ready to go. We've got our wire placed through our hook eye. We want that to end up right about at the bend. So we'll take this and secure it. And same thing, when you're wrapping this in, make sure that you pull that wire back sufficiently so that it doesn't interfere with your hook eye. The other thing you want to do is make sure on your final wire here that you keep your wires both top and bottom and wrap that down with good even pressure. Now you see the reason why we're using the large diameter 210 thread. And this is a 4/0 hook. It should have 210 on it. We'll take our shank, make sure we've got our hook in the right configuration. We'll put that together and we'll wrap that down. And I doubt if there's many fish on this planet that can tear that apart easily. And the same as we did before, we'll come through here and we'll wrap underneath of that wire just to give that a little bit more strength. And we'll go right into our yellow. And your first few wraps are going to be a little challenging because you've got a hook point right there. Pull that tight, tie it off, trim our material, I'll brush it out. Now because I'm more in the center of the fly here, I'm going to want to add another tuft on top, just like we did on that last section, because I want to build that profile a little higher. So same thing, I'll tease out some of the material, I'll cut it off. Usually takes about an inch is all you'll need. So I've got about an inch of this exposed here. I'll trim that off of the backing, like so. I'll grab it in my fingers and just pull out those shorter portions, because we're really looking to build height. We're not looking to build a major amount of surface area. Trim off the butt ends, put that right on top. As you can see, we're just about ready for some more flash. So we'll add some more of our root beer flash. Again, about 8 or 10 strands. Right down the side. About half in the material. Pull it over, pull it right down that side, tie it off, smooth out our transition a little bit, and go to our next tie-in point. And we're just going to work forward again. We're going to use our golden olive that we've been using. As we're getting towards the head here, we don't need any more barring. Always use that hook shank to tighten up on your thread. Use the leverage you get off of that hook shank. I will put another tuft on top again. And we need a little bit of orange to simulate those front fins. So we'll take a wrap or two of orange right here. As I move forward, I'm going to change my olive to a little bit lighter shade, just because a perch tends to have a little bit lighter shade right up around the gill plates. So I'll put this little bit lighter colored olive here and finish out my head with that. And we'll do the same thing with our lighter colored olive. We'll take about 1 inch of that, trim it off the backing, remove the shortest hairs, trim the butts even so they hold well. We'll tie that in right on top. Then I'm going to go back to my dark olive, and I'm going to take about 1 inch of that hair. I'll trim that off of the backing. I'll also remove the shorter hairs. I'll even up the butts, and I'm going to take that dark hair and finish up right on top, just to give me real good contrast and to make this fly come alive. Whip finish right there. Trim our thread. We don't have too much cleaning out to do on this hook eye, but we'll clean it out a little bit. And because I'm using white thread, I can come in with my dark olive marker, and I can just hit my thread with my dark olive marker on the top. So all that's left is to finish out our head, and I'll finish out my head with some UV cement. This stuff is tough as nails. It dries quickly, and the fish won't destroy it. And we'll take our UV head cement, and we'll finish out that head with the UV cement. It dries hard as a rock. And because it's UV activated, it doesn't take any time at all to dry. The only thing we have left to do is to put some eyes on this baby. Usually on these larger flies, I'll use a 12mm eye. And my product of choice for gluing them on is E6000. There's no other adhesive that I've found that will hold eyes on as well as this stuff does. So I'll kind of look the fly over, decide where I want to place the eyes. And I usually don't put them too close to the hook eye. I want the fish to key in so that he hits the hook well. So I want the fish to key in on the eye as well, so I'll take a generous dollop of this and I'll put it just above the middle of the body, in other words, just above the shank. Now, if I put my eye on a bodkin, it's a little easier for me to handle and to place it on the side of the hook shank. And I can flip the fly over If I look at it closely, I can determine where that next eye should go so that it lines up well. Putting another real generous dollop on that side and placing that eye right down on it. If I wet my fingers a little bit so that they don't get stuck in the adhesive, I can push those eyes together until they actually just about touch. So I haven't made my fly big around like this, but I've made it tall and skinny. It'll hold its shape, and that glue will touch on both sides, and that's one of the things that helps hold those eyes together well. And we'll give that a couple of minutes, and then we'll add a couple of finishing touches and we'll be set to fish. There we have it. We're completed. We've got a true 9.5 to 10 inch long fly. We've got our perch colors. We've got our profile, and this thing will swim beautifully. And it's bulletproof.